Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're going to open with county tonight. Chair.
Thank you, Don. Okay, we're going to call to order the County Commissioners meeting for August 21st, 2019. Announcements: the County Commission meeting is being video and audio recorded. Is there any public comment on the County Commissioners that's not on the agenda? There'll be public comment for the Select Board after this. So county is just, there's no new business that I know of. Approval of minutes and payroll and treasury warrants.
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. We have official business today. We have a property owner request for approval and execution of a Conservation Commission NOI notice of intent for 115 and 117 Baxter Road for relocation and alteration of house on premises. Ken's going to just walk us through it.
Yes, the property is on the bluff. It is in danger of, the bluff is eroding and it's in danger of falling over the bluff. So they have gone to the ZBA for an approval to be able to get, to move the property. The next step in the process is to go to Concom to get their approval. And then the third step in the process is to come back to the Select Board to request a license and one big beach easement in terms of being able to move the property to the other side of Baxter Road. So the only thing that we're doing at this stage is in fact approving the application to Concom to have them consider the effect from the Concom's perspective. Assuming that Concom does go forward, the matter will then come back to the Select Board for review of the grant of a license in exchange for one big beach easement.
Can you remind me why it has to go to Concom? Is it within 100 feet?
It's because of the 100 feet
Of the beach?
Of the beach.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Any questions or comments from the board? Or thoughts?
More just that, that's also the point in time, if and when it comes back to us for a license, that we can, in addition to one big beach easement, if there are any other conditions we want to put on the license, we can discuss then.
Absolutely. It is clearly within your jurisdiction to put the terms to the grant of the license.
Right. And that's a good point. We should be careful though, because sometimes what happens is these things get a momentum. And so, like they get a momentum of their own and we come back and we say, well, geez, we want more than one big beach. We want some other things. And, well, wait a minute, you didn't tell us that before we spent money with a lawyer and before we did this. So if there are other, I'm not saying we're going to figure that all out tonight, but I think sometimes the sort of the process and what we do, builds a, so people have expectations built in that we've agreed. So some of the issues, we've done this before. I don't think it solves the erosion issue. It might buy some people some time there. The previous one we did it to, they moved it, but then they sold. So is there an issue, is that okay with us? Do we care about that or not? Would be one thing to talk about. One big beach, I think, is a minimum. This might be a property owner that could be in a lawsuit with us, in some point. Are we going to be, if we're going to be friendly with people, we shouldn't be suing each other. If we're going to, at some point, we might have to move the road. I'm just tossing out issues. If at one point we may have to move the road, do we want, this person and other people that we're giving licenses to opposing us moving it? The state makes moving and abandoning a road very difficult. And so there's a lot of different issues. There's more layers to this, I think, than just, a one big beach easement solves everything, so that we should be aware of and, deal with when we get to it.
Were there any additional conditions put on when 109 was allowed to do this, besides the one big beach?
No.
And that's actually something I was just thinking, is that although 109 serves as a precedent for doing this, I think that since then we've started things like a coastal resiliency plan, and I feel like we've been looking at this area a bit differently, including look at the potential relocation of Baxter. So I think it's an important precedent to look at, but I think property owners should be prepared that we are looking at these differently, and there could be additional conditions that might include things that have to do with preparing ourselves for more erosion and retreat.
I just wanted to note too that when that property at 109 was sold, that license agreement had to come back to the town for an assent to transfer it over to the new owner.
And at that time, could the board made additional, is it just pushing the license over, or could we add it or change something with the sale?
That's a question for council, I
Okay.
would say, but
Or is it just
it didn't come up. The county commissioners didn't seem inclined to make any changes. It was at that time just a consent, and there was no discussion of further negotiations. But whether or not it could happen, I'd defer to Attorney Pucci.
Okay.
I actually have a question as well. I think it's for George, as to whether or not we're actually allowed to preclude someone from engaging in a lawsuit against us as part of a licensing agreement.
Yeah, you pretty much could negotiate anything you wanted to try to. You could negotiate a agreement not to sue, hold harmless agreement. Those are in some of the agreements. In terms of reconditioning the license, it depends on what was in the original license. I don't see anything that would preclude you from, if it was transferred, adding further conditions at that time. But yeah, a agreement to not sue another party could be a part of any agreement. And in addition to that, a hold harmless agreement that party will indemnify you if anyone else files a suit against you.
Thank you.
I think Matt brings up a good point on the alternate access, if we have to move that road. Just thinking through that, if this house is on top of sewer, or is a sewer line on that side of the road, or is it the water line? Or is it all on the,
I think sewer's
Other
close,
side
I
of
think
the road.
sewer's closer to the water, and then water's further. Sewer's closer to the water line's on the other side, so. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, right now, the alternative access comes in a very different
right?
way.
So maybe it's more moving the road, or what things that we don't know, that hasn't even happened yet, we're not even thinking
Right.
about.
Well, first off, precedent doesn't mean that if you learn new things and you become smarter about something, that precedent doesn't mean you have to continue to do things the other way. You can improve,
Right.
and so that's sort of one issue. And I was involved the first time in a lot of this, and I don't think we were looking big enough or globally enough on the whole issue. So I think, and I'm not saying this one property is a chance to do that, but I think at some point we need to, because we can't, you can't do this piecemeal. You can't do it one property at a time, and you can't, so there's a lot of layers to this that I think we need to really dig into, I think so.
Is there anyone from the public like to speak? Okay. Any more comments or thoughts, motion?
I'd make a motion to assent to the NOI with the stipulation that we will not be granting a license without conditions.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously. Any commissioners' reports or comments?
No?
No. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Over to you, Dawn.
Okay, I will call the August 21st Select Board meeting to order. Greg, would you like to do the announcements?
Thank you. Good evening. First announcement is the Select Board meeting is being audio and video recorded. I'm going to take them out of order a little bit, if that's okay. Next, I'd like to announce that the Cape and Island Suicide Prevention Coalition requests for a proclamation regarding Suicide Prevention Week to recognize September 8th through September 15th, 2019. I don't know if there's anybody here to read the proclamation.
Do you want me to read it?
Do you mind?
No.
Thank you.
Proclamation for Suicide Prevention Week. Whereas in the United States, 1 person dies by suicide every 12 minutes, and 121 people die by suicide each day. And whereas 20 veterans die by suicide each day, and whereas suicide is the second leading cause of death for Massachusetts residents ages 15 to 44, and the suicide rate on the Cape and Islands is 1.4 times higher than the state average. And whereas suicide is a tragic and disruptive event for families and communities, it is estimated that annually there are 6.3 million suicide loss survivors who have lost a loved one to suicide. And whereas suicide is a public health issue and a community concern, and through increased education and awareness of the issue, a great number of suicides can be prevented. Therefore, we do hereby officially designate the week of September 8th through 15th, 2019, as Suicide Prevention Week in the town and county of Nantucket, Mass.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next announcement, I'd like to call down the DPW Director, Rob McNeil, to discuss our roadway lines and crosswalk painting. Give a little update.
Thank you. Rob McNeil, DPW. We are planning to start the crosswalk and line painting effort this coming Monday, focusing around the schools first, First Way, Surfside, and the adjacent intersections, and then moving through the core and some of the other the roundabout areas, so the heavily traveled areas. Beyond that, we have our vendor scheduled again for September 8th to come back, or to come on island this year to do all the long lines, center lines, and edge lines. Just to give folks an update, we've had some struggles to get those folks here. Springtime was wet everywhere, including off island, so they struggled with a lot of the cities and towns that they were already obliged to. By the time the schedule freed up, it was mid-June, and obviously between the boat schedules and just the amount of people here and parked cars became just a task that was going to have to wait until after Labor Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. A reminder, the town offices will be closed on Monday, September 2nd, in observance of Labor Day. That means the next Select Board meeting is Wednesday, September 11th. We're still finishing up our summer schedule. And then I'd like to go back to the other item.
Yeah, can I just, before we go, I just need to note a few changes to the agenda.
Okay.
I failed to do that under acceptance of the agenda while everyone's paying attention. Under real estate matters, number 2 and 3 have been tabled. Under town manager's report, liquor license regulation amendments have been postponed until September. And number 1, under town manager's report, we are going to do those right before real estate matters because some of the staff members presenting need to leave. And we do have a new business item tonight that was unanticipated. We realized that Harbor Fuel needs a temporary extension of their tank farm license because it expires on September 6th. And we will not be having another meeting prior to then. So I think that's all the changes. We will be continuing the public hearing, number 2. So why don't we, I'll just open that now and take a.
Let me finish the announcements
No.
first.
No, I was just going to continue it.
Oh, okay.
So that people know that it's off.
All right, and then do a whole consent vote again, okay.
So we'll just continue that to,
Somebody needs to open it and then somebody needs to
Yeah.
vote.
so we'll open that and we'll continue it to
Then
9:25.
you close it again. Yeah.
Can someone make that motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Sorry, I should have done all that at the very beginning.
It's my bad, I should have reminded you. Good, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Excellent. We were just doing this to make Elizabeth Brown sweat it out a little bit, because she loves public attention so much. I get to do the fun stuff, especially when Libby's not here, and I know Libby will be sad with this, but I get to recognize a long-term employee, our town collector, who is retiring this week. So I'll get up, and I'm going to ask, I'm going to ask Elizabeth Brown to come forward, and the Director of Municipal Finance, Brian McNeil. You're gonna come up? We'll start over here. Libby's better at this than I am. Well, as I said, I already laid it out. So before you, we have Elizabeth Brown, who is a 28-year employee of the town of Nantucket. And I speak on behalf of Libby and town administration that we are going to miss her immensely. She's been amazing and a great advocate for all town services. And I'd like to pass it over to Brian Turbot.
First of all, I'd like to say congratulations personally, and thank you for everything that you have done from the time that I started with the town in 2014. You have, with your leadership downstairs, when I made the transition here, it was a lot easier knowing that you were the collector and that the job was in very capable and good hands. And in the little over 5 years that I've been here, every day you've handled every situation with the utmost respect and professionalism that, knowing how difficult sometimes the situations that have come in can certainly be. So I want to say thank you for that. I'd like to congratulate you on your 28 years of service and wish you all of the best on behalf of the entire finance department as well.
Thank you all. I love being with Western and I love working at the school. It's been wonderful.
And those are the announcements.
Okay, great. This is the public comment portion of our agenda for anything that's not otherwise on the agenda for discussion. Okay, seeing none.
Oh, no, we have one right here.
Oh.
Thank you, members of the board. Apologize for my attire. I'm recovering from a back injury, so this is pretty much all I can comfortably wear. I'll be brief. I'm accompanied by some other members of Newtown Road. I've got a bunch of signatures here from about 20 of the residents that live on Newtown Road and some of the side streets. Basically, I'll hand this out to you, but we, the undersigned permanent residents of Newtown Road, Newtown Court, and Lewis Court, request that the members of the Select Board acknowledge our concerns regarding Newtown Road. Basically,
Oh, I got you.
it's just to say that it's just not me up here complaining, but, so in a nutshell, what's happened to Newtown Road is it connects Hooper Farm Road to Fairgrounds Road. I've been there for 20 years, and in that time, I've noticed it. It started out when I was there for Jerry Mack, by the way. It started out as a quiet residential side street. Just the residents used that street, and that was it. But with the pace of development and everything else that's gotten Nantucket the way it is today, everybody uses it, and we get that. But what we noticed was the speeding got really bad. And the increase of pedestrian use and the bicycles, that increased heavily. And so in that time, I noticed that not only the increased traffic, but the speeding got so bad. I went to the Traffic Safety Advisory Committee, and those guys were great. I outlined all the problems that we've seen, and I said that I speak on behalf of all the residents there. They all agree with me. And they did their due diligence. They were great. They came up with a plan for a repave, a sidewalk, and speed bumps, because they did a study with this traffic strips. And that was 5 years ago. They bundled it in some, they told me there was a process, and we got that. It was capital projects, and it had to go through approval, and it did. It got there, and then it went to the ballot and got shot down because it was bundled in with probably things that people didn't want anyway. And when I came back from this injury about 6 weeks ago, I noticed, because I had the time to really sit there and watch, it got really bad recently. So what's happened was, we noticed that during the backups and for most of the day during the summer, and it's also in the winter, people want to turn right onto Newtown to avoid the rotary at Sparks, congestion, and they get angry and they accelerate dangerously to the point of something bad is going to happen from Hooper Farm to Fairgrounds. It's not so much coming the other way, although they do speed that way. So when they see that it's all jammed up for most of the day, they'll take that road, and everybody's using that road just as another major, it's a throughway now, it's a major way. We didn't get what we wanted to, it got voted down, but we're still left with, what do we do now? Because it's really bad, and it's not just here and there, we see it. I wish I had video evidence for you to show, I just didn't have the time or the energy, but without what we originally wanted with traffic safety and their plan, we're still left with a huge problem. Everybody uses it, and we get that, that's part of the pace of development. They're gonna use it as a side street, but there's a huge problem for some reason on it. Everybody just wants to fly through there, and it's really bad. I see bikes, children, everything is a hazard now, and we just wanted you to be aware of it, and maybe somebody can think outside of the box and come up with something temporary, this or that. We just don't know, but we're left hanging, and it's
Maybe a
pretty bad.
temporary speed bumps would
That's
be
what we were
a
thinking.
possibility.
It's to the point where it's, what I've seen in these guys, it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Because they get emotional, they hit the accelerator because they're mad. It's basically, it's unique because the road is positioned between the two rotaries. So when you're coming down Old South and you get to Fairgrounds, you're like, I'm not sitting through Old South rotary traffic. I'm going to take a left onto Fairgrounds and a quick right onto Newtown to get to Hooper Farm Road.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same way when you're coming off of Hooper Farm Road. They take a look at the congestion there, and even when the congestion stops throughout the day, for some reason, they still go down that road 50, 60 miles an hour, and that's just not an exaggeration. That's what I've estimated some of the cars that I've seen they go that fast. And that's when the traffic lets up. It's all day, and it's also all night.
Yeah.
I don't know if,
I know we've already discussed bringing this back for town meeting, but of course that puts it into next year's budget cycle without it being in conjunction with the traffic circle, which is probably why it didn't pass.
okay.
But we probably do need to think about doing something temporary, so let us see what we can
And I know that,
find out on options.
you could say a lot of that. I could be one of many that has the same problem on their streets. I've heard other people have the same problem, but I notice there's a lot of speed bumps on a lot of streets that were built into the pavement because of these problems, and I don't know.
I think they make a difference on First Way.
Yeah. And that was part,
And
it's, Newtown Road is now to the point where it is not just that quiet side street where just people that live there use it. The whole world is using it. It has to be set up that way. So, do you guys did you have anything to add? Is it good? Okay. Thank you.
I think we definitely have seen it, I'm sure. I have.
Okay.
Yeah, I can say on the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, we've been talking about this for the last couple of years.
Oh, good, okay.
Just pedestrians, getting a sidewalk there, like what can we do now? We saw, we don't live there. I don't think anybody lived there. Well, Dave knows the area. He's on BPAC, and we've been eyeballing this. And I think if we put it in this year's capital without the traffic circle and sidewalks on, Old South Road by the Inky, taking care of Newtown Road, speed tables. I think it'll pass, it's my guess, and it'll fix a lot of that.
Great.
It might not happen as soon as it's needed.
Okay, great. As long as it's still in the loop, that'd be great.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Definitely. We'll be talking about that more in October, what's going on the warrant.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay. Are there any other public comments? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to new business, which is the Harbor Fuel license extension.
Move approval?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, approval of minutes, warrants, and pending contracts. We don't have any minutes. So warrants and treasury contracts we can take together.
Move to approve?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Approval of contracts. We have 4. Are there any questions, comments? Motions?
I would make a motion to approve.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
One quick question on those. Are these, do we make the same contracts with these same companies every year?
For our island home?
Yes.
Yeah, for the most part.
These are the same contracts
Yeah.
as previous, okay.
Oh, and we should note that one of these was a very great $500,000 grant for the dredging by the town pier that we've been waiting on.
That's from the state, right?
Yeah, state grant. So next, we will move to the budget reports. We're going to take both water reports first.
Good evening. Mark Willett, Wanna Water. Thank you for juggling it around. The football team thanks you. It's in full swing, so trying to get to practice.
No, I'm not so sure.
Want to comment, for the fourth quarter, we ended pretty strong. Overall, very strong year. There was a 2% increase in water use fees, which are water bills. We expect that every year, a 2 to 3% increase just by the number of new services that we're installing. There was a 5% increase in water connection fees. That's about a 5% increase. That we've discussed in other meetings with you guys at the end of the quarter. A development on Old South Road came in with a substantial number of new connections. They have not been installed yet, but they were paid for, and that's where that bump came from. On the expense side, in the fourth quarter, during the fourth quarter, we had a pretty large expense, well, not super large, but $28,000 that we had to come up with our survey equipment that we use daily to locate all of our new services and pipe and all of our survey equipment. It actually died. We tried to send it away to get it fixed. There was no repairing it. We bought it used about 8 years ago. So we got its use out of it, and we had to make the move and purchase that. It looks like we're going to end the year with about a $1 million revenue, which is what we've been planning with our retained earnings policy that we're putting in place, with the goal being to build up a retained earnings during the good years and then use that retained earnings for capital projects further on, and we won't have to borrow as much money to finish the capital projects that need to get done. So financially, a good quarter and an all-around good year for Wanacoma.
Can I just ask a quick question? Just some of the numbers, because I know we've talked about them a bit in the past.
Yep.
When it comes to the aquifer, we have an 11% recharge rate. Is that,
It's more than that.
it's more than that?
Usually, the math comes out to about a 40%
Okay,
recharge rate, but that would be exaggerated. I think it's less than that.
okay.
I think it's somewhere in probably the 20% range.
Okay. And then in the past, I think you said that we were pulling about 5%?
Yes.
Does
The
that-
town itself, that's Wanacoma and Sconset.
Okay, and does that 2%, because I don't know if the actual fees have changed, but
Yep.
does that mean then that we're now at 7%? Is there a correlation between that 2% use fee?
It might
increase?
not be a full 2%, but we are withdrawing more.
Okay,
And when I do the annual report for Mass DEP, I'll have those numbers for you when we calculate them out.
Okay.
We're probably pushing, if we were 5% before, we're probably over 6% now.
okay. And then all of that was calculated in our new 20-year permit
Yes.
for how much we'll pull.
Yes, which we did get it, I got some information today there. They don't agree with a lot of the data from the data platform on the population. They want to wait for the 2020 census, which we would actually get in, I think, 21. So that would be, we don't have, we'll be under, we can still pump, we're still good to go. But we might not have the official permit until 2021, when they can look at the new census data to see if that backs up the Nantucket data platform data on population.
Are there any sort of average numbers of water usage per person more broadly that we can kind of use to?
Yeah, we're in that 80 gallon per person this time of year.
Mhm.
So
And does that confirm, do you know if that confirms the data platform number?
it probably does match up really closely to that.
Okay.
Their issue is, it's hard to say the longevity of the person with the cell phone that they collected the data. Were they here for a day, they here for a weekend, or were they here for a month? To me, it doesn't matter if they're here for a day, they're still using water at some
That's what I
place.
was thinking.
You know,
Yeah.
whether at a restaurant or at water fountain, wherever.
Yeah.
They're still consuming our water.
Yeah, thank you.
But again, overall, Wanacom had a good year. Sconset had a banner year for Sconset, actually. It's pretty slow in Sconset. It usually always stays the same. The fourth quarter, we actually put in some new services, and overall last year, I think we put in 6 new services in Sconset, which is a big deal for Sconset. It's all has to do with a few of the subdivisions on both ends of the village. Blackfish had a few lots left going in. Windsor, there was a couple. And then the new subdivision down the Low Beach side. They're all starting to get active, so.
Cannonberry?
Yeah, Cannonberry side, yeah. We did see an increase. The rental increase it shows there that we got from rental income is from the Verizon contract. It was in one of the years where we get the 5% increase. Still in negotiations with the other cell phone carriers. They came back to us with an option to put a large antenna in the field, kind of in the open field around the tank where the old softball field used to be. I told them we really weren't interested in any of that. So they came up with an idea to add things to the top of the water tower on the metal, and we need to review those specifications to make sure that we protect the coating on top of the tank before we negotiate a deal for any other carriers. The expenses for Sconset, we had to do a pump station upgrade on some equipment, some emergency treatment equipment. If we ever needed to pump chlorine in, we needed to do that. So we got some estimates. The engineers drew up a plan for the treatment processes and equipment that were needed, and the estimates came back at like $100,000 to $110,000. We ended up purchasing the equipment for $14,000, and we put it in ourselves. DEP's coming over in the next 2 or 3 weeks to check it out, make sure it's okay, and get the approval. So any way we can find ways to save like that, we're going to do more and more of it. But other than that, Sconset finished, where it needed to, met all the revenues we expected. It exceeded the revenues a little bit on the connection fees, but more to come in Sconset as those subdivisions continue.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you're looking at, sort of putting money aside for a rainy day.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was looking at is, it's not going to, if we're counting on sort of new connections just to make our budget, then we're going to have trouble. I'm looking, your expenses were up, I think your revenue's up 2% year to year, and your expenses are up 7% year to year.
Yep.
And so that is not I'm looking at it very simplistically, but that, sort of.
Yeah, that's not a winning formula,
Yeah,
so we
so-
want to be prepared.
Yeah, so we need
We
to-
all know that at some point, when that is, I don't, that's above me when we're going to slow down, but we really don't want to rely on those new connections.
Right, and that's sort of what I took out of some of the numbers. And the other thing I always sort of remind people is 7% doubles every 10 years. So if you run 7% more, in 10 years, you're spending twice as much. It doesn't seem like much. It's only 7, it's close to 2.5, it's a lot.
Yeah.
So, those are the kind of things we have to control, and/or you have to build the increases automatically in, so that you're building more of a buffer.
Right. So
It's one way or the other, so.
our retained earnings policy, we came up with it with 1% of the total plant value, which is everything Wannacomet owns, plus 15% of our yearly average debt service, plus 2% of the next year's expected budget. And that's how we get the number, the goal of what we want to try to save, and then use when we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again for moving things around. Appreciate it.
Go play football.
Coaches.
Good evening, Noah Carberg for Nantucket Memorial Airport. So for the airport financial highlights, it's been a successful year at the airport. I want to thank very quickly, it's a team effort. 2 people are in the room, Daniel Drake, our chair, Brian Turbot, the director of municipal finance. Jamie Sansbury is our finance manager. She's not in attendance, and Tom Rafter is traveling back to the island today. For fiscal year, revenue is up 19%, which is $2.7 million over last year. A large contributor was a 30% increase in the fuel revolver cap over last year. Other income categories responsible for these are fees and rentals across the board. It's a mix of aeronautical and non-aeronautical revenue. $600,000 bag belt reimbursement from the TSA, which was owed from 2012. There's still another $600,000 outstanding from that. And called out in your sheet is revenue from parking tickets. It's not tickets, it's actually parking income. Has increased $34,000 over last year. Expenses, excluding debt service, are up $1.2 million over last year. Most of this is attributable to fuel expenses, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. That increase was roughly $1 million over last year. We also had a minor increase in service and maintenance expenses, which can be attributed to wear and tear on the system and infrastructure, and a insurance claim to our ARF station bay doors. Part of our story, our revenues have been and probably are likely to increase linearly year over year, but the danger is that expenses over the long term for aging infrastructure are expected to increase exponentially. So we're just always drawing attention to the plight of the airport improvement program, the declining purchasing power in the federal grants and aid. So for our income and revenue summary, we budgeted for our fuel revolver cap of $4.0 million. We did end up increasing this to $5.2 million based on the fuel price and volume sold. I'm going to discuss revenue and expenses a little bit later. The net earnings for this year we were able to realize actual earnings without actually relying on retained earnings this year, for a total net earnings of almost $3 million. I'll also point out we are transferring into a stabilization fund. We do have a veteran workforce with some individuals set to retire, so we are planning ahead to fund a stabilization fund to pay out their benefits. And for our certified retained earnings summary, I wanted to point out that we are consistently working with the finance department to identify the appropriate proportion to retain for infrastructure emergencies versus pay down our capital projects, and that will continue to be the case going forward. Go to the fuel revolver. The sale of aviation fuel is one of our largest economic performance standards. This was a very good year to sell aviation fuel. It tracks very closely with GDP. Fuel sales for this year of $8.3 million exceeded last year of $7 million. This is due to 2 factors. This was selling 120,000 gallons more of Jet A, And this is also due to an increase in the price. The average price this year was $5.14 versus $4.70 last year. Our net profit for our fueling side of the house is 9%. 9% over last year. Our net profit margin is routinely around 42, 43%. We expect the same this year, or it is the same this year. And it is noted in here, we do have a fuel revolver purchase cap that we did increase this year. Obviously, as costs of fuel change, as our forecast change, we need to manage the cap accordingly. For example, if there's a price shock, we would have to manage the cap to keep us from exceeding this cap. If we do exceed the cap, we would then have to buy fuel out of our own operating budget, which would be disruptive. At the airport, we are very happy with the use of the fuel revolver. We work very closely with Brian. It just does need constant attention and management and updating. That's good. So in the airport business, revenues are very highly related to passenger enplanements and aircraft operations. After a slide for several years, this summer saw stabilization, or possibly this early summer saw stabilization or slight increase. But while the trends are for our summer operations to increase, our overall operations are still decreasing, mostly to a bottoming out of our winter year-round market. At the same time, we also continue to have increasing plane sizes. JetBlue's 100 CD-190 is our most frequent large air carrier aircraft. American had recently upgauged 2 years ago to the 76-seat E-175. And in 2022, JetBlue begins taking deliveries of the Airbus 220, which I believe they're speccing as a 144-seat aircraft. The trend in the industry is to size their way out of a pilot shortage, carrying more people for the same amount of pilots and crew. What this figure doesn't show, however, is the internal transition in our markets. We've seen slight increases this early summer in our operations and in our enplanements counts, but it's been a phenomenal switch from what we call the Part 135, the seasonal year-round 9-seat air taxis, into the large air carrier TSA screened market. For the summer, we are flat to slightly low on the Part 135, again, the 9-seat Cessna, but we're up roughly 19 or 20% in our large air carrier that sees security screening. On the revenue side for the quarter, there aren't any major changes. The two that I'm calling out are our rental incomes are increasing as we continue to pursue non-aeronautical land opportunities. And our other income, that 427% increase was for how a TSA reimbursement for the bag belt fell in the quarter. For the annual revenue summary, I did want to call out a few pieces of information. Land income for the fiscal year was up by $340,000. We took possession of a set of T hangars, which increased our hangar income by $41,000. Landing fees are up by $124,000. Again, this is driven mostly by the large air carrier service. Advertising revenue was up by $58,000, parking lot fees by $34,000, and again, our miscellaneous income of $600,000 was for the TSA bag belt reimbursements. On the expense side, the items that I'm calling out are, even though I mentioned the cost of fuel had increased, it doesn't show in the third quarter. I have to review our operational stats. My expectation is we tankered up on fuel in quarter 3 when fuel prices were probably lower. And in services and maintenance, the 31% increase is due to us having to front the operational cost of our ARF door replacements, which are damaged in a windstorm. And for the annual inspections, the call-outs, again, you can see that the cost of fuel increased by 26%. Our salary payroll was down 2%. We have a unfilled position, which for a couple of reasons we didn't fill this year. That is not our intent going forward. We do intend to fill this position. We're not just keeping it on the books. And then our services and maintenance costs under operations are every 3 years we have a major scale triennial drill. That was the cost driver for that. And services and maintenance, I mentioned the ARF doors. For debt service, it's nothing special. We did have some scheduled debt that just rolled off the books per the schedule. I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
I'm fine.
That was good, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. David Graves, Sewer Department. Our total revenues were down slightly, 4%. However, that is a timing issue as far as the sewer privilege fees and everything getting out through the tax office. I spoke with Brian in length today, and he anticipates those are all going to start to show up again at the end of this month or next month. So there was no concerns. The sewer permit revenue, it slowed down a little bit towards the end of the quarter last year, but it's upticked tremendously. We did have a little lull that we expected we would with the finalization of the Schimmel project. Now that everything's online now, we're having a pretty significant uptake in everything. You'll notice our expenditures were up a little bit with debt service and everything else, but our salaries have gone down a little bit due to we had a retirement. One gentleman retired, and we still have 2 open positions that we haven't been able to fill yet. And then you'll notice a pretty significant decrease in our maintenance and repairs. Like Mark, we're trying to do a lot more of our own repairs in-house with our staff. We have a pretty robust maintenance staff now, so we're able to do a lot of smaller stuff on our own without having to bring in vendors or whatever like that. And because we now have a full-time engineer on staff, our professional services are also down quite a bit, 20% from last year. So we're on track. All of our projections are looking good. We have no concerns on anything the way we're going. We are luckily just coming out of the Schimmel project just finished. The C Street project is just closing up, and the Surfside treatment plant are also just closing up. So we should see some different numbers in the coming quarters as far as that goes. There was one item that kind of sticks out a little bit. It was other purchases or other line item that had gone up, in expenses. And the reason for that is it says other supplies. Has to do with now that we're in OSHA state, we've had to start to purchase a lot more safety equipment and meters and just trench safety and everything like that. So that number's probably going to continue to go up a little bit until we get all the parts and pieces that we need. And one of the other things that we've been doing an awful lot more of on the island is now we're bringing over instructors for 3 or 4 days at a time for all of our training. Instead of having to send 5 or 6 guys off, stay overnight, hotels, rental cars, we're finding it's going to save us a lot of money in the long run. So that's working out very well. We had 7 different classes over the winter last year for all the different trainings, from wastewater trainings, confined space, arc flash safety, focusing an awful lot on safety just to get into the OSHA compliance. I think all the other departments are having to do the same thing. So safety for us is, we're going to see some upticks in that in the next few quarters, but it's just to get us all in 100% into compliance. But other than that, I didn't really have anything else to call out. We're, like I said, the permitting, we did hit that little lull that we thought we were going to hit, so some of the expenses were, the revenues were down a little bit, but that has turned right around now, so, and it's coming back. And again, I'm glad to say that, the Schimmel project's online and the permits are coming in daily, so we're really starting to uptick again. And if there's any other questions for anybody, and
None for me.
all right, thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David.
And then I hope to have some tours coming up of the C Street pump station at some point. I don't believe all of you have seen it since it's been upgraded, so I think you'd be pretty happy to see. I know Jason's been
Yes.
down, but
Well,
I'll
definitely.
let you guys know, so thank
I'm
you.
right down the street. Yeah, I want to see it. Okay, so that completes our budget reports, and we will move back to real estate matters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ken Bogren, Real Estate Specialist. The first item on your agenda is the disposition of some parcels taken earlier by eminent domain on Lincoln Circle. These parcels are located 14 Lincoln Avenue, and 553 square feet is being transferred for a price of $3,594.50. The transfer also makes provision that there can be no further subdivision of the property other than what can be done before this transfer. And so it is the notice of the taking had been published, and so this is the last step in terms of the disposition of the property that we took by eminent domain to fix the end of Lincoln Avenue up on the cliff.
Just one I'm not quite sure the way you said that is the way it is the actual. You're saying, because let's pretend these are subdividable.
Right.
Once we put this on, they have to come back to us to subdivide.
Well, the thing is, now, what we've said is that, yeah, if they have the right to subdivide, they still have that right, but this doesn't give them any additional, the additional land doesn't give them an additional right to subdivide.
That, we may be saying that, but that's not, I don't think, how the legal documents are written, because we've had people come back and have to ask us. One way someone in Monomoy got around it was they took possession in a different entity so that they were able to, to bypass this. So, so the intent, I think, isn't to keep them whole and then add them so they have a bigger house. The intent, when we put some of these restraints in, was because we were having some issues with those type of things. So anyway, and I don't think, if you look at the legal documents, I read them, both of them today, and both the legal documents are, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they're saying the existing parcel and anything added to it have, are not able to be subdivided. That's what the document we're signing says, correct?
With respect to this particular parcel.
I think to both of them, yeah. I believe so.
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't prepare for this agenda item, so I don't know. I would need to read them.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm not opposed. I'm gonna accept this, but I just want to make it clear.
And Matt, can you just clarify again how that's different from what Ken is saying that it allows?
There is one lot up there that was subdividable before.
Yeah, but that's not in this particular package. It's one of the two items that were tabled.
That we're tabling, okay. So that's the one we want to clarify it on.
That's the one that needs to be clarified.
So this lot can't be subdivided.
No, this one
anyways.
can't, but the point is that the idea, like, sort of, the idea hasn't been that, because one of the concerns that we were asking early on in this process of, sort of 5-6 years ago, are we selling, especially in sensitive areas, are we giving the extra land and then we're getting subdivisions and we're getting twice as much, sort of pressure on the harbor or, et cetera. That isn't the intent. The intent is that, these people can, enjoy a larger, larger lot. It's to clear up the road, et cetera. It isn't to, create windfalls and that type of issue. And so it's specifically written that, that it doesn't make something subdividable. We've had people come back and ask us to release that, I think in Surfside, and I think we did. In one case in Surfside, they came and they wanted to subdivide, and we allowed them to, but they had to ask our permission to do that. And I believe that that's still how it's written. I don't think it's changed in there. So, anyway.
It's been the common language, but I think
Right, the
that
point's been
something
made,
may come
and-
into
yeah,
play
it'll
on
be raised-
the parcel
it'll be
we're not
raised with the other two
discussing.
parcels, so.
Yeah, correct.
Does it allow additional ground cover?
Yes.
It does. And do we, I think, in some of these, we've had a little table that tells us how much additional ground cover there is, but we don't know that, do we?
On,
That is something Eleanor was doing.
yeah, with respect to the other two parcels. But that's tabled because there's some additional information with respect to the point that Matt has raised on those two.
Yeah, I think that's interesting to see when we approve these, how much additional ground cover is being allowed.
And I just, and I just want to make sure that we're all clear on what we're doing. That we're not doing thinking we're doing one thing and have it be something else, either direction. I just think we all should be on the same page. And I support this one if we want a motion.
It's a highly important thing to know if the amount of land from one of these can create a subdividable lot, because it is a much different value. But on this one, that's not the case.
Right.
That's not the case, yeah.
I'd make a motion to approve.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. So 2 and 3 are tabled. Number 4?
The next item is a memorandum of understanding with the Sconset Trust. This goes back to town meeting last year, when town meeting approved an article to take a number of properties that are designated for open space and have the town be able to transfer them over to conservation organizations that are better equipped to look after the maintenance of the properties. So what's important is that all of the properties that we deal in, there's 6 properties in Sconset that are involved, and all are currently available and only able to be used as open space. In addition, the state charter requires that a thing called an Article 87 needs to be filed with the state in terms of being able to get the state to approve the disposition of property that is available for open space. That was done, and it was approved as indicated in the memorandum of understanding. There are approximately 20.47 acres that are going to the Sconset Trust. There are 6 different parcels that are reflected on the map, and the parcel on Milestone Road that is owned by the Sconset Trust is going to be made available to the town to be able to use for purposes with respect to the expansion of the sewage program in Sconset. The other thing is that the document provides that if the Sconset Trust ever ceases to exist or no longer functions as a conservation organization, all of the parcels come back to the town. They can't go to any other third party. They do come back to the town.
I'd make a motion to approve.
I'll second it for discussion. Just one question. Would we have the right, if we wanted to run wires or anything other than sewer through this? Is there any need for that? Would we want the ability to do that? Was that contemplated?
With respect to?
With respect to the parcel that they're going to allow sewer to run, if there's anything else that needs to be run in that easement, and I don't even know what it might be, but, let's pretend it's Verizon or electrical or anything else. Is that something that was contemplated and would be allowed?
I do not know the answer to that, Matt.
Okay.
I represent the Sconset Trust, Attorney Arthur Reed, and that was never discussed.
Right.
Specifically, the request by the town was that, there's a likelihood that in the future, it would be desirable for there to be a sewer connection line running from the north up by Plainfield Road down through this parcel to the Milestone Road. And it would be an underground thing, and the way the memorandum has been worked out, we would have the opportunity to meet with the town and determine from a conservation standpoint that the location of it was appropriate and
The best route.
and so on. But there was never any discussion of anything other than the underground sewer line.
Okay. And just the reason I'm bringing it up, because we're concentrating on sewers now, and I'm saying if we're going to take a bit of a long view, is there anything else that we should be thinking about that we're missing? And if there is, let's add it. If not, we're fine.
And once again, I think this really is conservation land. And just as we're receiving conservation land, this is conservation land that we already have. And for obvious reasons, running a sewer line underneath in an appropriate location is not going to cause any problems. It's not going to be deleterious to the conservation value of the property. But I can certainly see that if there were, particularly above ground, or a whole slew of excavations being done, I think that's kind of a little bit inconsistent with the purposes for which the trust originally obtained that parcel.
No, I could understand that, but if it were, I'll take the other side. If it were sort of, conduits underground that we put in at the same time, so we didn't have to ever touch it again, if that was something we contemplated, would that be something that you guys would consider?
There's nothing in the thing that says we can't consider it. And
Okay.
I think that if the town had a good argument and made sense to do it, the trust obviously wants to cooperate with the town. And the answer would be, we'd talk about it, but I'd prefer to keep it at the present time, that the deal is what's been discussed up to the present time, namely that it would be the sewer line, which, as I understand it, is not anything that has yet been definitively determined, but I gather that David had specifically expressed interest in having that ability to run a sewer line through there.
I would note too that utilities are already run
From
to
the other
the,
direction.
to the surrounding properties. I mean, you've got down Burnell Street in Plainfield, they already have, water and, cable,
From that
phone,
direction,
everything.
underground, yeah.
Everything goes that way already.
Right.
So I don't know if there would be a need for that.
Okay, I'm just sort of, once we do, some of these things, once you do them, they're done. And I'm just looking to say, is there anything we should have thought of before? Might not just be that, but that's all.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and that's always the concern. There's things that we don't even know today that we need. I think in terms of conservation, I think it's difficult to sort of say or carte blanche that, we would allow anything, because the sewer is a known entity, so we can calculate the damage to the conservation land. But
And again, the areas surrounding this parcel have long been developed, so it's not like anything more is gonna be kind of created around it, so there's really no need to bring additional services in there besides sewer.
Okay.
And there's no reason why we can't discuss something with the Wisconsin Trust if something comes along that's with a compelling reason.
One other question on these, because when we did the grand swap, it went on for a long time. There were a bunch of different properties, and anyone was involved. It was quite a bit of a headache. Are we more prepared to process these in an efficient manner and not be, how are the deeds on these various parcels? Is this going to be a little easier for staff and for, the parties involved?
Well, there are 6 parcels involved, as indicated, and 3 of them are ready to be conveyed now. In fact, there's been some discussion. Vicky Marsh had asked in an email recently whether we wanted to do the deeds at tonight's meeting as well. And I said sure, but they haven't come through. I know she was on vacation last week, and I can understand that would have backed things up a little bit. So those 3, as I say, are ready to go. The other 2 of them, yes, the land court is involved. And so that's got to be cleared. And the third one, which is a road that's being, a paper road that's being eliminated, hasn't been taken as yet. So the taking is going to have to take place, obviously, before the town can convey it. Yeah, that's it.
And you guys understand it may take a while. You understand that the land court, all right, thank you.
Believe me, we understand. I understand. that's for
You won't be
sure.
knocking on Libby's door every other week? No, all right.
No. In fact, Arthur and I have met with Eleanor, and the whole object is for us to get together, develop a strategy to meet with the land court, try and move this stuff out of there, because there's stuff that's been there for 5, 6, and 7 years. And so there are new people that have come into the land court operations, and hopefully with that and with work that we're going to do on our end, we'll be able to clean up some of this backlog.
Okay.
Right.
Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item is a license for some landscaping improvement and construction of a fence within a portion of a paper road out in 48 Matacasham Valley Road. This matter has been carefully reviewed. We spent a significant amount of time with the Real Estate Advisory Committee explaining to them. The short version of this is that there's a town way that goes from Matacasham Valley Road out to town property at the edge of the water. The property in yellow was a subject of a yard sale, and title to that has been tied up in the land court. What's happened is that there are people that are parking on that property, and in fact, the adjacent property which acquired it, on both of those, in order to be able to leave their cars there to get to the beach. And so what this does is allows us to be able to clearly define the property and then get to the point where we can legally make the pathway, there's a walk pathway across there, make that happen as well so that we can finally clear this up and get this resolved. It's a very complicated process, but it's really a very simple act that we're asking to do, and that is to be able to have a greater definition of where the public access is at this point in time until we can get the definitive decision from the land court relative to transfer the actual title to the land.
And Ken, just to confirm, that dirt road that goes through the bottom right corner of the property, you can kind of see it there.
Yeah.
That stays.
That stays because that's going to be the access to the town property, which
Okay.
is by the beach there.
And that's an easement that we were
Pardon?
taking? That's an easement that
No,
we? No,
the town owns that.
the town owns that,
Yeah.
even though it's cutting through that
Yeah.
lot?
Yeah.
So will there still be vehicle access, or that?
Yes.
It will be,
Yeah.
okay. It would be a little easier if we had a GIS picture, I think, from above, from the, if you could see the, sort of the layout. We can kind of catch it on here, but it'd be a little easier. Oh, you have it? That'd be great.
Or a
I
satellite?
can pull
Yeah.
one up.
And the other point is, what are the plannings, what type of plannings, what's going to go there as a visual? It's not,
Because you were saying it's a fence mostly,
It's a fence.
okay,
like a post and rail,
Yeah,
split.
post and
split
rail fence.
okay. Because this is a,
I had a GIS map, but I left it in my office.
What's address 46?
48.
48.
Matacasham?
Matacasham.
MADE. Beautiful.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I may,
Yeah.
Yeah, run along and show us.
At the end of the day on this, per the yard sale arrangements that had been worked out, I can figure out how to use this thing. Where
It's
do
the
I-
top button. No, see on the side, there's two buttons there?
Oh, yeah.
Top one.
Turn it the other way. Wait, no, the other way.
This-
No, you're pointing at yourself.
Too complicated for me, I mean, technology, I mean, oh my gosh.
There it is.
All right, well, anyway,
Aim it at the screen.
there we go, how about that, all right, miraculous, okay. Light shines on Marble.
Do we need to give you a feather pen or a quill?
This is the right-of-way in question. And the concept here is you have the yard sale parcel on each side. The town is going to retain ownership. They're not going to convey the whole width of the way. They're going to retain ownership of a corridor down the middle of, what is it, 10 feet, I think, Ken?
Yeah.
That will be the access. And and obviously my client who is over here will be able to close in with a fence, which this license is the subject of, to keep people from parking. There's been a horrendous problem. As you can see, their house is very close to the right of way. And it's been a horrendous problem for them this summer to have large numbers of cars parking virtually on top of their house. And Ken's been out there, Eleanor's been out there. They have pictures, we have pictures and so
Well, they not
on.
only park on right, but they park in their driveway as well.
Right.
In fact, making it almost impossible for themselves or their tenants to get out of off the property.
So this will enable the management in a better way. It will not in any way prevent access to the water there. My client's property ends, it doesn't go all down to the water. This is a town-owned parcel between their property and the beach. That's about it.
So where will cars for the public park after this?
Well,
Onto the town parcel?
There's always space on the town parcel for the people to park.
Right. Is that the plan? That's what I'm asking. Because the reason I'm asking this is further down to the left, we lost, and some people were really upset. Some of the fishermen and families were really upset because they lost access. We sold the access and we didn't keep, the board at the time didn't keep it.
We're not giving away anything that was used for parking.
I understand. Well, we are because it's used for parking now. So,
But not,
so anyway, I'm just,
Are we going to reorganize down here better to accommodate more vehicles? Because obviously there's an overflow issue, and that's why they're parking back there. Is that a DPW question?
So my notes on this is what
Okay, thank you. What's the pleasure?
I'd like to see how the public is going to be accommodated to make sure that it's, that we've thought that through. Because if we put 10 feet and put a thing up, I just don't want to think that we're moving the problem to the other neighbor or moving it back onto Matasham Valley Road. If we fence off that and then put a gate across down the bottom and say you can't park on town land, are we going to move the problem elsewhere? I just want to see what our plan is here, myself.
Once the land court process goes through, though, at this stage, we would lose it regardless, correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we still have to convey it. So we could still lose it, and the point being, I don't want this to go on and then find out later on that, geez, you can't park in front because that's taking the view shed, and we agreed not to take the view shed away. And then we're pushing the cars out onto Matasham Valley Road? Is that what we're gonna do? I want to make sure we know what we're doing before we agree to it, that's all.
Is there any reason why we couldn't move this to the next agenda?
well, it's been just a horrendous problem for my clients all summer. And the use of the property, their use of the property has been really compromised by these cars being parked so close to it. The fact that we have the license, which is a revocable license, to put up the fence, would enable them to get control of the situation for now, while perhaps the town can look at the point of whether the parking situation can be relocated or enhanced in some other place. But it really is a
Yeah, no, I know.
terrific
But
intrusion upon their privacy at the present time.
are they ready to put it in tomorrow? Because
I don't know.
we've only got 2 weeks left of
Yeah, I know, and,
the
well,
summer.
there'll be people still around, I think, out there into September, but, and who knows how soon they can actually get somebody out there with the, to put up the split rail fence. But in any event, they would like to really pin this down so they know where they stand and are able to protect their property.
I'm getting the feeling that everyone's supportive of allowing this, just as long as we know that we can accommodate on the town parcel with a little bit of
Yeah.
reworking. Am I correct?
That's how I feel. I mean, I think I'm for this. I'm ready to push it forward, but I do want to kind of see. Matt, you summed it up really well. Is it going to push it over to the other neighbor? Can we do something down closer to the ocean? Like, what's our plan?
Right.
Because if not, we'll lose sight of it, and then it'll come up next summer. And you're like, oh, I wish we would have thought about that.
Yeah, and the last time we did it, there were a lot of fishermen that were not happy. So, on a different parcel. So I just,
Now's the time to figure out what we're going to do so
Yes.
that it's in place for next summer. So I was just suggesting we put it on to September 11th.
I think
and
that-
internally figure out what we're going to do.
Yeah, and the comment that I would want to make is, this has been ongoing now since 2013 and 2015, but I think that all of these yard sale parcels that are coastally related, I think 5 years later now, look very different. And usually, I've been looking at them in terms of what about future access or relocation of roads. But this goes back to our issue with, in 5 years, the amount of cars has increased so much. So now we kind of want it back, and we're worried about pushing cars elsewhere. And the problem is, if we accommodate 20, 30 more cars down by the ocean, that means we're clearing vegetation, we're destabilizing our own coastal resources, we're pushing them somewhere. So I think this should go forward, we're past that stage, but I just think that all of these yard sale parcels that are near the coast, we really need to look at differently in the future.
I don't think I want to add 20, 30 spaces. I don't want to make sure there's a net loss.
No, but
That-
it looks, I mean,
I
If
just
they're
want to clarify
parking-
my concern.
yeah.
I don't want to lose what people are already used to.
Well, that's what if I'm looking at that stretch of road, that probably could fit about 20 cars on end, but that's an estimate, whatever it is.
Yeah.
We've got to clear vegetation, which I think near the coast is not a great idea, but it's where we are right now.
Well, then I definitely would want to make sure what the plan is,
Yeah.
You can add these many spaces, but we have to clear vegetation, or we move it over here and we don't have to clear anything.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that we don't want to narrow these roads down so much that there can't potentially be sort of on-street parking in these heavily used beach areas, but.
That's sort of the tension that's going on is, the landowners want them narrowed, we'll pick on Brant Point, they want, 5-foot, 6-foot walking paths. They don't want, they want it to protect their house and keep that away, and we as the public want access in a different manner, and that's the tension that we're sort of working with. And so I just would like to understand it a little better before we do it. And I think Rita makes a really good, really important point in any time, and this is sort of, we haven't, earlier I was talking about how if you learn something, you don't have to repeat your mistake. I think, what we're learning is that the more sensitive the area, the more sensitive the, coastal or anything that's, water flowing into the harbor, et cetera, on these yard sales, we have to be very careful. We should make sure that we're not taking away future, wetlands or future areas we're going to need for these issues. And, it's great for the homeowners now, and they get a bigger house and more hardscaping and everything else, but are we, sort of tying our own hands later? And is our kids going to look here and say, geez, what did you guys do? Why weren't you thinking about this? So I think it's smart what Rita's talking about. I think we should start to try to put some of these through that lens as much as we can.
I think there's a nice balance that the property owner's rights, their space out there, and also what Rita was saying, also keep it open for the public. People need to have access to it. And I think there's been a lot of work done, so I thank everybody for doing that. I think September 11th isn't that far away. We can get a little more information. I'll go out and just walk it. It'll make me feel a little better if I can just see it. The maps are good, but
Do you need a motion?
Yeah, I need a motion.
I'd make a motion to take this up again on September 11th.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And, we'll need some kind of a recommendation from the staff on sort of how many parking overflow spaces we're losing, and how we can create a small area that's in the most sensitive
Yeah.
spot to accommodate those cars.
Maybe it is Matacashim Valley Road, I don't know, but where is it, So,
There might be another section that can be widened to accommodate on-street parking, but,
Yeah.
or there might be a section down
Yeah.
where the current parking is that can be expanded a little bit without being insensitive to the
Yeah.
potential erosion.
Yeah, some area already damaged.
Okay. Thank you.
I have one more thing, but it's not in that sequence.
Hmm?
I've got one more thing, which is
Oh, yeah,
which is going to come after Amy's.
Okay, citizen departmental requests. We have a request for approval of a change of manager, seasonal wine and malt beverage, Hotel License, 1709 Associates LLC, DBA 29 Fair. I think we just held this for
Yeah.
for finalizing the information.
Yeah, if Chief doesn't have any issues.
I thought Mr. Carlson would come up and just, the issue we had was the prior manager was Tracy Root was somebody that only Mr. Carlson knew. And we just, before we had a change of managers, we wanted to make sure that the new manager was familiar with what the requirements were for a manager of a licensed establishment. The business license manager has made contact with her, and they've exchanged emails that clearly articulate the expectations the town has of the managers, and we're satisfied that she's very familiar with and understands what those are.
Okay. I think we can probably just go to a vote unless anyone has any questions for the applicants. Is there a motion?
Move to approve?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you for coming in again. Okay, Ken, you're up one more time? Yep. Property owner request for a waiver of the sewer connection permit fee for a covenant lot located at 27 Meadowview Drive.
Yeah. The owners of the property purchased it in 2014, and they're requesting a waiver now of the sewer connection fee because sewer is coming into Meadowview, and they need to connect. And so it is the thing, this is the fee which is in fact our policy allows us to be able to waive, and the benefit is clearly going to the owners of the covenant home.
I would make a motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. So that's consistent with our policy. Now we will jump to select boards reports and comments. We have a request for approval of a conflict of interest disclosure in connection with the Historic District Commission. And we, as the appointing authority, need to assent to it, I believe is.
You basically just need to determine that Mr. Welch's financial interest isn't so substantial to be deemed likely to affect the integrity of his service. That's it.
Okay. Steve, did you want to make any comments or?
No. Hi, everybody. Good evening. For the record, Stephen Welch. I just wanted to touch base clearly here tonight as your appointee to the Nantucket Historic District Commission. My firm and I provide services to property owners here on Nantucket, and I'm thinking, I haven't been very active in that. I'm thinking to change that up a bit. And I contacted the legal division of the State Ethics Commission to determine what is required. I don't know if you want me to mention any of some of the details, or if you briefly, or?
Does anyone have questions about this?
I have just one. So what
Sure.
it is that the concern is that after the HDC review process, that some of these applicants might be future clients.
Yeah, and it was interesting because we looked at, I spoke with our HDC compliance coordinator in waiting, and Monday, I think it is. And conservatively, we have about 60 applications per meeting. If you protract out conservatively 48 meetings a year, that's something like 2,880 applications. So not knowing in advance who might contact you, the state ethics said, the legal division said, just put out a disclosure and see if you're appointing there are tools and forms in place for this. See if they'll determine that is acceptable. And then the other area is that the HCC will be discussing general policy type things. For instance, the stretch code, or which is going to go in effect soon, and or the net zero energy code, which energy code services verification certification is one of the areas I'm credentialed in that I may be getting involved in. And to contribute to that discussion, and I think I can contribute meaningfully, not only on those topics, but topics that have to do with the resiliency of the community, because energy is one of our resiliency areas. this would also cover my being involved in that type of discussion as a participant, as opposed to having to recuse.
I have no issues. I would make a motion to approve.
Second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.
Should we leave the committee reports till after? Or did anyone want to say
We can leave it till after.
anything now? Okay.
Sure.
Let's move to the public hearings. We've got a public hearing to consider the appeals of Ice Bear LLC of Historic District Commission approval of certificates of appropriateness number 72096, 72176, 72473 for a new dwelling, a pool, and a trim color change at property located at 41 Chuck Hollow Road.
Good evening, Nicholas Brown. I represent the appellant Ice Bear LLC, and the owner of 5 Parsons Lane. This appeal concerns the approval by the Historic District Commission of a house and a pool at 41 Chuck Hollow Road. My client's home sits directly behind the property in question and reports to me that the construction of the house has already begun. Notwithstanding this appeal, there are 3 primary issues raised by the appeal that we filed. 2 concern the house and 1 concerns the pool. With respect to the house, the first issue is its location on the highest portion of the property, as far back from the street as possible. The second issue related to the first is the height of the proposed home at 29 feet and almost 3 stories. The third issue, also related to the first, is the proposed location of the pool in the front yard of the property, a location necessitated by the fact that the house sits back against the rear property line. The property in question is 1.5 acres in size, and it's located in Tom Nevers, which is an outlying rural area according to Nantucket's development guidelines. The guidelines explain that the major quality of the rural areas is its expansiveness and openness, and its uniform height vegetation that stretches to the sea. The guidelines recommend that buildings not exceed 25 feet in total height and not have any 2-story walls. The most important part of designing a house is the bulk and scale of the building. The guidelines further state that the 25-foot height policy will be strictly adhered to in the open areas that are uninterrupted to the shoreline, such as along the South Shore, including Tom Nevers. In this case, the HDC has completely ignored the guidelines and has strictly adhered to nothing. The house is 29 feet at its highest point and has at least 1 exterior wall that is at least 2.5 stories, if not 3 stories. Further exacerbating the improper size and scale of the house is its location against the rear property line at the highest point of the lot, where the house will be more rather than less conspicuous. This location, when combined with the large scale of the house, will disrupt the openness that the guidelines are specifically intended to maintain. While the guidelines allow houses to exceed the 25-foot maximum where special site conditions exist that could mask a structure's height, no such conditions exist in this case. Indeed, a review of the relevant meeting minutes before the HDC fails to disclose any reasonable basis for the HDC's decision to set aside the size limitations in this case. There appears to have been no discussion of the matter whatsoever, which gives the distinct impression that the HDC intends to abandon the size limitations that applied in places like Tom Nevers. This home exceeds the maximum height by 4 feet and has numerous walls that are 2 stories, and like I said, 1 wall that exceeds 2 stories. These deviations may not seem significant, but they're likely to grow over time as people build additional houses, and the size of these deviations will become more significant, and the guidelines will cease to have the limiting effect that they're supposed to have. Put simply, the approval of this house will further erode the HDC's ability to enforce the size limitations set forth in the guidelines. We can see this issue at play in this case, where the owner, apparently very confident that the size limitations will not be enforced, and has begun constructing the house notwithstanding this appeal. Ultimately, in the absence of a reasonable basis for exceeding the size limitations set forth in the development guidelines, Ice Bear asks that the board reverse the decision of the HDC approving the construction of the proposed home in its current location and in its current size. As one last point on the size of the house, I would call the board's attention to page 147 and 148 of the development guidelines. I have copies here, if you'd like to look at them. The last paragraph, page 148, says, and I quote, that low buildings nestled in the vegetation are preferred to tall two-story buildings that are noticeable across the landscape. The guidelines then refer back to figure 154, which appears on 147, and you'll find a picture of a home under construction in Tom Nevers, very similar to the home at issue in this case, as an example of the types of construction that are supposedly not allowed by the development guidelines. Turning now to the pool, the HDC's approval of the pool is arbitrary and capricious because the pool is located in the front yard of the property. This is highly unusual because the pool will be visible from the street. Admittedly, the approval in this case is conditioned on maintaining proper screening for the pool, but this condition will be difficult, if not impossible, to enforce over time. Once the pool has been constructed in the front yard, it's very unlikely that it's ever going to be moved. The HDC's approval of the pool sets a bad precedent that is likely to be followed by others in the future. Indeed, we can see this playing out in the record before the HDC in this case, where pictures of other improperly sited pools and tennis courts are used to justify the improper location of the pool in this case. Given the size of the property in question and its previously undeveloped state, there was no legitimate reason for approving the pool in the front of the house. The pool could easily have been located behind the house, with the house moving down the hill or down the slope off the highest point of the property. In so doing, the HDC could have adhered to the objectives set forth in the guidelines to maintain the expansiveness and openness of the development guidelines. I would also add that an original proposal for this house that was submitted to the HDC and withdrawn did have the pool in the backyard, and it was only the subsequent proposal that switched it around and placed it in the front. In my client's view, the decision of the HDC to approve the pool in the front is arbitrary and capricious. It should be reversed. Thank you.
Okay.
Answer any questions you have.
I'm sorry, I forgot to put the guidelines in your
Yeah,
packet, but I do
no.
have them on the screen, if you give me 1 second. So now it's the HDC's turn.
HDC, okay, thank you.
Hi, good evening, Stephen Welch. I'm going to work from some notes. I learned last night that I'd be representing the HDC on this. I'd just like to mention one thing quickly. Although low buildings are preferred, no, I shouldn't say unfortunately, it's not a requirement. And with respect to unfortunately, my position here tonight is to represent as much as possible the facts versus my own personal views or my own votes in these matters. So I want to be clear about that up front. I guess I'd start by saying that the board let's see here. It was determined by the board that the proposed is appropriate in context, including due to limited visibility. This area and the surrounding area are not an open rolling grassland to the ocean. Much, if not most, of the Tom Nevers development in this area, Lyons, Wood Hollow, Parsons, and Chuck Hollow, consists of homes with roofs and second floors visible over the 10 to 12-foot trees and scrubs at the street side and throughout the lot, and some trees of twice the height. In fact, on that point, when you pull into the area and you look down at the intersection of Lyons Road, what you see is the roof of the roof and second story of a home. So the reason that that's important is that it provides context, which I'll get to in a minute. The proposed is no different than those homes, except to the benefit of the massing. The architect designed approximately 2/3 of the ground cover as a one-story, 1 1/4 story structure, and the remainder is a 2-story structure. The second story is as tall or shorter than homes in the general area. I would like to point out, with respect to a house on a hill, that this lot at grade, where the home is to be built, is approximately 32 feet above sea level. The neighboring lot at 7 Parsons is between 46 and 54 feet above sea level at grade, where the structures are. 5 Parsons is approximately 56 to 58 feet above sea level at grade, where the structure is. I believe that's the appellant's client. And as I said, the height of this home is not taller than homes in the area. So let's see, this information and the respective experience inform the decision of the board. After having taken two views, a view for us, if you aren't aware, is we actually go to the property and we take a look at the surroundings, the context, and anything that we feel would be relevant based on our experience having sat reviewing applications for many hours every Tuesday. We then deliberated for the better part of an hour. Unfortunately, the minutes do not and cannot really contain all the information, the deliberations that occur. It just simply, you would literally have many, many, many pages. In relation to this, for my own frame of reference, I had to look up the legal definition of arbitrary and capricious, which I believe is the legal standard. And according to Black's Law Dictionary, I'll just share it with you if you don't mind. For arbitrary is willful and unreasoning action without consideration and regard for facts and circumstances presented. It goes on to say, in bad faith or failure to exercise honest judgment. The counterpart is for capricious is to mean legally on a whim, impulsive, and unpredictable. And I would suggest to you that the board's actions were neither of those, independently or together, and we ask that you find the same. With respect to the pool, as you may be aware, the HTC is purview is for architectural elements and structures that are visible from a public way or a traveled way. This pool at its elevation, as was proposed, due to the scrub in the trees between Chalk Hollow and the location of the pool, despite some members believing that it was an inappropriate location, is not visible, and the application was noted as a condition of the approval that it would not be visible at the time of inspection due to the existing buffer or at any time thereafter, so that in perpetuity, for instance, someone wouldn't come in and clear cut that. I don't know why you would. You wouldn't want to have your pool visible from the street, but just so you're aware of that fact. Thank you. Oh, was it also colors? The colors are white and black, white trim and black doors. Although we had a great amount of discussion about a black door, it was determined that it's on the first floor and not visible, and the white is not an uncommon color in that area. Thank you.
Okay.
I would say that my client doesn't object to the colors. We only appealed that COA for purposes of completeness.
Okay.
Rebuttals.
I guess that's you.
My only comment and rebuttal would be, while I appreciate that other houses in the area are taller than this proposed house, I think that bolsters the point I was trying to make earlier, that the limiting effect of the development guidelines is diminished every time a house like this is approved. The 25-foot limit that's established by the guidelines becomes irrelevant over time. It starts, 27 feet, now we're at 29 feet, and over time will be, 30 feet, 31 feet, 32 feet. It's something that should stop so that the guidelines actually have meaning. Thank you.
Thanks. Public comment?
He gets a chance to rebut.
Oh, rebuttal.
I don't want to play tennis, but I'll do a quick rebuttal. So the idea here is that the guidelines are meant to address the rolling open plains, grasslands. This area is not that. It is not an unbroken stretch to the ocean where if, for instance, there was a house on a hill and it were a split rail fence and an open grassland, I can't speak for the commission in full, but I believe the outcome would be different. This instead was based upon the fact that there is context of height in that area, certainly more. I drove through there for the third time this evening, and I stopped counting at 15 homes that would fit the criteria of this home. So it's not as if a precedent is being set, and it's not as if the guidelines specifically with respect to the open rural areas is being broken. Thank you.
Okay. Other public comments?
Madam Chair, Stephen Cohen, I represent the owner of the land in question, and I'm here tonight with Mark Cutone, who's the architect. I actually think Mr. Welch did an excellent job, but just for the record, would like to make a few points. First of all, the standard that you legally are supposed to be looking at is the HDC Act, and Section 9B of the HDC Act provides that houses are supposed to be considered in their design relevant to that house on that lot and in that neighborhood. And if you look at the Tom Nevers neighborhood where I happen to live, you would quickly find out that there were no houses in Tom Nevers until 1972. The southeast quarter was where the Native Americans lived, and it was the last area of Nantucket to be developed for that reason. The architecture in that area is perhaps the least historic in its both actual age and its design. You have exterior staircases, really large decks, weird things on roofs. Most of the houses do not meet any kind of historic guidelines. I like to think mine does, but it probably doesn't. The other thing is that the rules that the guidelines that Mr. Brown is suggesting, actually, if you look at them, apply to the outwash plain and the sandy areas between essentially the South Shore beaches out to Nantucket. They don't apply to and are not meant to apply to the wooded areas of Tom Nevers in the southeast quarter. Even though the southeast is the southern side, that's not what those guidelines apply to. I wish it did. It would add a couple $1 million to my property values if I lived out there, but I don't. The house that was designed here was thoroughly, and the pool and the parking, was thoroughly considered by the HDC. There were numerous meetings about what it should look like and how it should comply with the rules and guidelines. The house started out in one way and was carried along to the next, and it has only a very small portion of it, less than a third of it, that is at a full 2 stories. Most of it is actually fairly additive in its massing and low in its scale. It is set more than 300 feet back from the road. The pool is more than 180 feet back from the road. It is not visible by anything. The shrubs in that area are between 8 and 20 feet tall. And the HDC, I think, rightly approved the house based on its design, and in fact approved the pool based on a lack of visibility, which actually means it doesn't have jurisdiction to rule on it. So I don't know how anyone would see a pool at grade through thick trees 180 to 200 feet through these woods. You basically can't see 3 feet into these woods, never mind 200 feet. So I think the HDC had both a highly considered review process here and also came up with the right decision. Under the arbitrary and capricious standard, you're not supposed to substitute your judgment for the HDCs and can only rule against them, I think, on 2 grounds. One, if they have made a decision that is not based on fact, meaning that is not that they've made a decision that is inconsistent with the actual facts on the ground, or if they've made a decision that's outside their jurisdiction, or if they've made a significant procedural error, which is not alleged here. So there is no allegation actually that they're in violation of their statute, and there's no suggestion that they have made a decision without the thoughtful process that they're supposed to be. So I think they've met that standard. And in fact, the last time you saw this process with a pool in the front yard, it was on 9 Lincoln Avenue or 9 Lincoln Circle, where you ruled to uphold the HDC, and that pool is only behind a little garage, maybe 50 feet in, behind some privet hedge. So I think if a privet hedge and a garage can block a pool sufficient for the HDC to actually approve the design in perhaps one of the most historical areas of Nantucket, I don't know how you could come to a different determination 200 feet back in the woods of Tom Nevers. So I would encourage you to uphold the HDC's decision and to deny the appeal. And if you have any questions about the architecture or the design or the review process, Mr. Cutone is happy to answer them, but he's also happy to go home early if you don't.
Questions from the board?
I suppose one question I have is that the landscape plan shows, I'm just wondering if that's an intention to keep the existing vegetation, or if there's the intention to clear and then replant.
Mark Cutone, architect of record.
I'm also a neighbor 2 doors down. I've been in the neighborhood 12 years. So I'm very familiar with the property and the context. No, all of the existing scrub oak will remain. It's very hard to revegetate in Tom Nevers. So there's a construction road access, which was pre-existing prior to the owners buying the lot. That will be revegetated with indigenous plant material. And then we will make the cut for the drive with the blind so that the improvements to the property are not visible from Chalk Hollow Road. You're welcome.
Anything else?
I have one question for town council. When we're making our decision, can we equally weigh what we see in the minutes with the HTC reps' kind of testimony or speech here tonight? Is it one and the same? Or do we need to see it in the minutes?
No, you make a good point about, you don't need to see it in the minutes, per se. If it is, described to you what the basis for the decision was, what the process that they went through was. So if you find that the evidence before you, justifies denying the appeal, and that's really what the context is, and you can find that. But you do make a good point in that, and by the way, George Pucci, good evening, everyone from Town Council's office. Apologize for leaving that part out. Something in follow-up to the point you're making is that your review of these appeals is not de novo. It's not on new evidence. If you were to make a decision, which you're going to, and that was appealed to Superior Court, the Superior Court's hearing on the case would be de novo. It would be based on new evidence. So the parties would have to introduce evidence of new to prove to the court one way or another what should have happened. It wouldn't be based on the record. Here with you, you're just doing it on the record. You're not taking in new evidence. You're not conducting site visits or anything like that. So to the extent you find that, but having said that, now, there is a heavy burden when somebody comes in with an appeal of an HDC decision to you. They have the burden of proof to prove that it is arbitrary and capricious. And as I think Mr. Welch had said, you're not, the lead case on this is Gumley versus the Board of Selectmen of Nantucket from the 1970s. Even if you would have reached a different conclusion, you're not to substitute your judgment for that of the HDC if you find that there was a rational basis for it. And so there are two grounds to overturn the HDC. If you find that they ruled on issues that were not within their jurisdiction, which is clearly not the case here, or that their decision is arbitrary and capricious. And what the meaning of that is that there's insufficient evidence that a reasonable mind would deem necessary to support that.
Right.
So if you are finding a complete absence of factual evidence to justify the decision, you would have grounds to uphold the appeal.
Okay. I asked that because I might have missed this in the minutes, but looking at the minutes, I really was interested in hearing the appeal when I hear Mr. Welch speak and that there were site visits once or twice and they looked at everything and they looked at the polls. That helps me feel a little more comfortable that a good decision was made. If it was just pushed through and they didn't go to the site and they didn't look at things, then maybe I'd have more questions. So that's why I was asking about things he's saying here, and I might have missed it in the minutes. But you did address this, Stephen, how not everything is in the minutes. So that's why I just kind of want to know how much we can.
Yeah, the description was so on point to the standards at issue. So for new construction, you're looking at Section 9B of the Historic District Commission Act. And I should point out as an aside, there are guidelines that the HDC applies. They're guidelines. They're not enacted regulations that are binding that would require a variance or anything like that. They're guidelines. Just what the word means is something that they can look to, or that almost more importantly, that applicants can look to have some type of predictability about what the issues are for a particular area. but they're not bound by those guidelines to the extent they exist. If there's a rational basis that they found that either a certain guideline didn't apply or that there should be an exception to that based on the setting in question, then they were within their jurisdiction. A couple of points about the HDC Act itself, which is what is binding on them. This is what they have to apply. And Section 9B talks about, in the case of new construction, the Historic District Commission shall consider the appropriateness of the size and shape of the building or structures, both in relation to the land area upon which the building or structure is situated, and buildings and structures in the vicinity. And the commission may, in appropriate cases, impose dimensional and setback requirements in addition to those required by applicable law. So if you look at 9B, that sounds exactly like what Mr. Welch was talking about, is that they're looking at the setting and then they're determining the appropriateness based on that. And then with respect to the pool, there are two sections at issue. Is they really are governed by what's viewable from a public viewing area, public way, a subdivision roadway, anything like that, the beach, some type of public viewing area. And that's under Section 2A in the definition section, and it's also in Section 9C of the Act, and it's actually an affirmative burden put on the Historic District Commission that they shall not consider building features not subject to public view. So if you find that that case is made, that that pool is not subject to public view, really there's no legal way of not upholding, their decision and denying the appeal, because that would clearly be right within their jurisdiction. So, the minutes, if you think that that's the only evidence before you and you find them insufficient to justify the decision, then you have to make that determination. But, based on the presentation, it certainly looks like something that they were going by the jurisdiction set forth in the Act.
Question, is a pool a structure?
A pool, yes, a pool would be so they're governed by exterior architectural features. Building is a combination of materials forming a shelter, so it wouldn't be that. It would be, just bear with me one second. Structure, a combination of materials other than a building, including but not limited to a vending machine, sign, fence, wall, terrace, walk, or driveway.
Okay.
So I would say it's a structure.
So it's a structure. So if they, as a board, decided that we'd like to position these structures this way, that's something they're allowed to do, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So two things, though, about structures. Two things within their jurisdiction. One, they can, for a structure that's visible from a public viewing area, they can make that determination if this is appropriate in the context and the setting that it's set. Then the other thing that they can do with a structure is they can determine whether it's viewable from a publicly accessible viewing area. And if it's not, it's really not in their jurisdiction to deny that. And then another thing that they can do is, even if it is viewable from a public viewing area, they can, if they want to allow that particular structure, they can impose conditions for screening of that structure in perpetuity. And they can put that right in their certificate.
All right, we won't go down that rabbit hole tonight. That's a change, a relatively, 10-year, 20-year occurrence.
You see, I color-coded my presentation in case we
I'm not
got
going,
into the debate.
I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole tonight.
He's ready for it.
No, there was three, the vote was, if I read this correctly, it was 3-2. The dissenting vote, was it based, the dissenting people, I think, are both here, and was it based on anything, what was the dissent? What was the concerns of the two minority?
Good evening. I actually was in the dissent, and it was with respect to the house. And it is my individual belief that we need to focus more on the guidelines, that a house should not be on a hill. And I did, at the first meeting, after the first viewing, indicate that, and then I did, at the second meeting, reverse myself for the record, and I think I even noted that it was for the record, that much of this would not be visible, so that the net effect would be, you're not looking at a two-story structure with a roof over an open plain. It's behind all of this 10-foot or taller scrub oak, and therefore it was kind of a mitigating, certainly a mitigating factor in my mind, but more as to register a protest vote with the rest of my members, which, you know, they understood. Well, I voted against it.
I do those votes sometimes, too.
I was the other dissenting vote, and mine was primarily concerned with the pool being in front of the house. But after we went and viewed the site, it was very clear, while that's not where I would want to put a pool, or where I thought it was appropriate, we couldn't see it, so it wasn't in our purview.
Thank you.
Jason, just for the record, the views are not public meetings. For open meeting law purposes, the members go individually, so you wouldn't see a record of it. But if you look at the minutes, there is a motion of view, and this document is in the view packet. So there's evidence of both the viewing and the affirmative action to take the viewing in the record. Okay, thanks.
I think it's a high, I'm going to support the HCC here when we get to it.
I haven't
Oh, we have to close it.
I just
yeah.
haven't closed the public
sorry.
hearing yet. I didn't know if anyone wanted to make any closing statements before we close the public hearing.
I just question the appropriateness of hearing exposition from the commission members about their thinking that isn't reflected in the record that's before the select board on appeal. I just want to put it on the record that I don't feel that's appropriate. The record is the minutes. No one's been sworn in here or testifying under oath, so I don't feel it's appropriate to receive that sort of testimony and consider it in making your decision. The minutes, in my view, are clear that the HDC didn't appropriately consider the size of this house, or if they did, they didn't give a basis for why they were deviating from the development guidelines. And in the absence of that stated reason, the decision was arbitrary and capricious. The guidelines are clear that there's a 25-foot maximum height. There's a standard for deviating from it, and based on the minutes before you, there's no discussion of why the standard for deviating from the maximum height was met in this case. Thank you.
Madam Chair, maybe town council can answer this. In public comment, can anybody talk in public comment?
Yeah, you're not bound by the minutes. You know, you're well, I say that there's a provision in the HDC Act that specifically talks about that the Superior Court will hear it in appeal. There's nothing that binds you to the record or precludes you from hearing either public comment or comment from a member or whoever else wants to speak before you, as long as you recognize that individual is speaking. So there's nothing precluding you from hearing that. And it was certainly relevant to you. You know, I found it a relevant question of, gee, there was 2 votes against. What were they, you know, in terms of you trying to conduct a thorough hearing as to what went on? So I think that, you know, my opinion, that was totally appropriate to take that, those statements before you tonight. Section 11 of the Act talks about your appeals. Appeals may be taken to the Board of Selectmen by any person aggrieved by the ruling of the Historic District Commission. The Board of Selectmen shall hear and act upon such appeals promptly, and the decision of the board shall be as determined by a majority vote of the members of the board. But it doesn't specify in the HDC Act that you're bound by any particular evidence or record or, you know, minutes or anything like that. And again, the rationale for the decision, in fact, presented by one of the dissenting members, was presented to you, and in my opinion, that's appropriate for you to hear that about what the rationale for the decision was.
I have one more question for Steve or Val or both. In your decision making over time on the HDC, have you generally considered the 25-foot outwash plane guideline in the Tom Nevers East location that we're talking about to be applicable?
I took an extra second so I could think about your question. Yes, I have. I can't speak for other commission members, but I have considered that, and I've considered overall the rule guidelines. This is more of a forested area, and there are guidelines for forested areas. And then, of course, there's the context of the setting and other homes in the area, which are really one of our strongest guides. It's not a regulation, but it is what's literally on the ground around it. And I think that is one of those pieces of information. Certainly, that's what other committee members have articulated they work from. But I can't speak directly for everyone.
Okay. Are we ready to close the public hearing? Are there any other questions for anybody? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Any comments from the board?
Yeah, I will. I think it's a high standard to overturn the HDC, and I feel, even though, there might be things here, like the big, huge driveway and the pool in the front that I wouldn't do, I'm not considering that. And I think that, I do think they looked at it, and I think even the people that voted against it looked at it, and they were not arbitrary and capricious. So I would say I would vote to uphold the HDC.
Is that a motion?
Yeah.
Yes.
I would second for discussion. I would agree that this doesn't, I think from the minutes it was very clear that after the viewing, it had to do with the lack of visibility. I don't think it was arbitrary and capricious, but I do think, I don't know that I'm going to articulate this well, but in some of these areas that are outside of historic downtown, where we're looking at neighborhoods, it seems from some of the HDC guidelines that they're charged with maintaining the feel of the neighborhood. And it feels like even though the two Stevens are on the same side, that they both made comments that seem in conflict, where on one side they're supposed to be, HDC is supposed to be looking at that house on that site relevant to what's around it. But it's common practice, and I've done it myself for submissions to HDC, where you go around and you look at the houses around it. And I think in these areas where there isn't that historical, it's not like Main Street, it's this shifting baseline where, to Attorney Brown's suggestions as well, I just think rather than looking at the historical context of the neighborhood and what the neighborhood is supposed to feel like, we're looking at the house next door. And that, to me, feels like we're getting closer and closer to something that is arbitrary, because the guidelines don't fit anymore. And we're looking at the house next door as opposed to that house relevant to that site. So in this particular case, I don't think they were. But I do think there is a lack of clarity when it comes to landscape, vegetative screening, and some of these newer neighborhoods that we are getting close to being arbitrary without more clear guidelines.
Any other comments?
I kind of echo what Matt and Rita has said, and I don't think it's arbitrary and capricious. Even though I don't think I wouldn't have put the pool there, and I'm not going to substitute my opinion for the HECs. But the testimony here tonight, not testimony, but the hearing everybody speak, I think it was helpful, in addition to the minutes.
Yeah. I was just going to kind of say exactly what Jason said, just that, I wouldn't want to pass my own judgment on, and I don't think that they acted kind of out of their purview or arbitrary. I think it is helpful having the in-person conversations, but if it could ever be reflected a little better in the minutes, one of the first questions I had is what changed the conversation. Originally, the pool was in the back, and then it was in the front. I think for us, as we hear these appeals, it would be really helpful to have all of that in the minutes the best that we could. And I understand you can't have 10 pages of minutes, but when there is a flip in a decision, just to understand that for our purpose.
I think that's something in the past. I think Ray Pohl has provided us with a little summary of the decision in the past. That was helpful, because obviously you couldn't do that you don't know which of these will be appealed, but yeah.
There was one in there, but it wasn't quite quite as,
It's sort of that tracked the why there was that switch.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt it was, I would appreciate more minutes. I do think, to me, it was fairly clear that after the viewing was when the opinion changed.
Yeah.
And I was
I mean,
asking,
so-
sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was asking for for more detail because I felt like what was happening at a lot of our meetings is that the HCC would sit and wait and listen to what was said, and then they'd counter what was said rather than put their argument on a piece of paper prior to the meeting.
Yeah.
You know, which would sort of be good practice. Here, we were putting down what we did and why and how we feel, you know, not waiting and countering what was said. I felt that that put the applicants at sort of a bit of a disadvantage. The other point I want to quickly make is I think, the other reason I don't think they're arbitrary capricious is the changes in the house, you know, downscaled the house and made the house substantially simpler and different. And that, you know, that was part of the process. I felt like a process did happen here, so.
Yeah, that, I mean, that's in line with what I was going to say, is that what I look for in making these determinations is whether they're arbitrary and capricious, whether they really thoroughly considered the full application, had any changes made, whether there were any administrative errors, and I don't see evidence of any of that occurring here. I think that it was properly considered, and I mean, some of these things are also not visible, and that was part of their decision-making process. So I think, are we ready to vote? All those in favor of upholding the HDC's decision?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Back to committee reports. I just wanted to mention that at our executive session coming up on September 12th, that we have invited the chair and vice chair of the Concom to sit in with us in regard to the litigation with SBPF, the appeal of their decision.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to remind you that you did have to open the hearing and continue the other one.
Oh, we did that at the beginning.
You did, okay. Because I heard somebody whisper.
No,
that-
we did it at the
Perfect,
beginning.
thank you.
Thank you, though, in case I missed it. Oh, yes, the appellant asked for it to be continued at the beginning. That's September 25th. We'll see you again on the 25th.
I'm sorry, I had a quick question on that. If the panel, if they always ask to move it, do we always say yes? Sometimes do we just say like, no, we're going to hear it now?
I think we have.
We have done that before? Okay. We're just- Like we
Probably
denied
depends
their.
on the circumstances.
Okay.
In this case, the two parties are trying to come to an agreement, and so the appellant asked for more time, so that they could work things out.
Okay.
And the hope is that it might be withdrawn.
Okay. Thanks.
And then CPC met yesterday. We are setting our dates for our deliberations, which is the exciting time of year where we see all the applications.
Affordable Housing Trust met last week, and one of the things that I thought was very positive is the trust has been considering down payment assistance for a while, and Christopher from Housing Nantucket sort of took what we had been thinking for a while and said, if you're going to put money into something, I think it would be better spent this way. And that was, she felt that it was because the down payment assistance for 150% level AMI, she didn't see that coming to her as an issue, but she felt that focusing on reaching out to people who have potential covenant lots and increasing the number of covenant lots available would be time better spent. So as we're going through the various things that we've outlined in the strategic plan, it's great to have some feedback and people coming back to us with where we should be prioritizing. And then I think just a quick mention that we had the Dreamland event on Monday, and it was a little bit different format with a mix-up of planning board, FinCom members, as well as select board. And I think 2 other members were there as well, and I think it went fairly well. It was a little bit tougher than the first time. And Dawn, you dodged 2 bullets now. So
Well, we're rescheduling, I believe.
Oh, and I suppose my takeaway from that was really, I think quality of life came up quite a bit, and Matt and the others can probably add to that, but that was one that seemed to be echoed as sort of the underlying issue behind a lot of the questions. And what does that look like, and what's changing, and how do we maintain that?
Yeah, I was one of the ones in the audiences hearing everything, and I thought it really helped me solidify that our process and our strategic planning that we just went through and everything that we're putting in is really what the community is wanting. And so it really felt that our vision is in line with what people want in Nantucket, and hearing that quality of life is something that we've already been talking about, and just kind of it solidified that we're going in the right direction. I also have some committee updates. Or do you want to talk about
No,
that?
go ahead. I was going to talk about that night. I thought it was because we didn't post it in time. We had to scramble, but we had Judith, Nat, and David Worth on there. And actually, we walked away. I think we all said that was really nice having a kind of a public meeting like that, talking about vision and what people want with people from different boards. So it was nice. And I agree. Watching it it's different when you're watching from the outside, 'cause you're not waiting for the next question. You're kind of really watching how it all played out. Almost everything was said, we're addressing in the strategic plan. And I'm glad you brought it up kind of at the end about the quality of life. And not everything's in our strategic plan, but the majority of the questions were there. This whole sustainability kind of umbrella or lens that we're looking through the strategic plan. I wish we could have done a strategic plan proposal for everybody. I think it would have felt, maybe not everything was fixed, but we're heading in the right direction. So it reaffirmed that what the kind of the work we're doing here with town staff and with the strategic plan.
Yeah, I guess I'll comment real quick. I think, it was sort of my opening statement. One of the things I still think is one of the most important aspects of the island is the open beaches and how we have retained our beach rights up to the high tide mark. I've shared with the board Nantucket ditch report from like 1880 or so, and also an article from Fran Cartoonan describing this. And I'll read a quick excerpt from hers. The Colonial Act of 1693, initiating the transfer of Nantucket from New York to the Mass Bay Colony, specifically declared that all rights and privileges acquired under the jurisdiction of New York were reserved to the people of Nantucket. This was understood by the committee, and this is about the ditches, but it deals with other issues too, to mean that ownership of all the ponds still rested with the proprietors. And so when the Mass passed a law in 1869, granted the commissioners, no. So, and basically and later on the state voted that another time and said, yes, we're not taking your rights away. What you have, you have. That's part of what explains why we as an island, have retained opened beaches. The first thing the proprietors set aside was paths to the water, because it was all common land, paths to the water, 2 rods around the great ponds, and then they set the beaches aside. The beaches were used jointly for more than just fishing and fowling. It was for whatever anyone wanted to use them for. There was a legal case in Sconset regarding the bluff, and there was it was understood that it would erode, and that the bluff would move, and that and that the public's access on the beach would still move. So those issues, that's how we as a community viewed those assets. And when I was a kid, if anyone ever went out to close a beach or to do any of that, the house would get painted, or they'd have the flat tires in the car the next morning. I mean, this was a serious issue, and we won it in court over the ponds. The state didn't want to decree, and they forced a decision. I think it was with Stojak and another young man needed fishing licenses. The state wanted them to have licenses, and we actually won in that. They didn't need licenses because the state doesn't own these ponds. And so the same issue we're having with the beaches is coming up again. But the point to make is with this ownership, which at some point I hope we, figure out how to assert and make sure that we continue to hold them. With that comes the responsibility as a community, and I spoke about this the other night, to enforce the rules and not overwhelm the property owners. It has to be a balance between the two. And so I just think, as we're going forward, I mentioned this in the strategic planning, quality of life is there. This didn't rise up to a level of a, specific point, but it is something I think we have to really pay attention to. And I think, it's important, I started out as a young guy here and I'm the old guy. It's important that, the you young people sort of remember this and read these things and research it to enable us to continue to protect those things. Otherwise, they'll erode. So.
I think when we did those stickies during the strategic planning, all of us put up free beach access. And that's a really important piece of the quality of life here.
Definitely.
Yeah, so we should capture that because that is a good point.
But we will be rolling out more of the strategic plan on September 21st. Is that the date? Or no, the 18th.
The agenda we just looked at.
Okay.
I'm a dog with the bone. I'm not going to let this one go.
Well, Matt, every time you call me young, I get chills, so please, I'd love it.
And you're handsome too, Jason.
Oh,
There you go.
sheesh. The young part is good enough.
Are there other committee reports?
Yeah, a quick update on, well, Christy, you had a bunch, right?
Oh, I just have a few.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say we had another waste summit last Thursday. It was with the haulers. Pretty poor attendance, but I think that's kind of expected in the summer. But I thought it was really helpful to see the haulers' point of view, and they actually brought in video. They've been wearing GoPros, and we get to see how they do all the pickup and kind of how difficult it is for them. And so understanding just kind of their business model and how they haul the trash, and then having the discussion of kind of how do we clean up the waste stream. So I just thought it was a really productive conversation with the haulers and the community. We also had we have another waste summit September 26th, and I wish Rob was here to tell you the topic, but save the date. And then we had another plastics ban info session. This is, again, just kind of getting ready for the 2020 plastics ban, helping businesses prepare, just kind of getting the word out so everyone's not surprised on June 1st. And we have another one coming up September 19th, 6 to 8 here in this building. Hopefully that will be really good. We've had about 13 to 15 attendees at each one, and each time we're getting different people asking different questions, and so it's really helping us. We've been building an FAQ across the internal work group, and we just keep adding to this FAQ and getting more information out there, and it's helping us clarify everything so it's not so confusing on June 1st. And then the last thing, the Neighborhood First toured with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and we also had some visitors come over from the Cape, people from other Affordable Housing Trust, Chatham, Brook Connect, whoever else was there. Community Development Partnerships. So we went on a bus tour around the island to see all of our SHI listed homes and learn more. We stopped at Richmond, got to see the progress there, and it was just really nice to see. We keep talking about scattered site and what Neighborhood First is going to be doing, and we really already have that on the island, and I just thought it was really helpful. We toured the newest home from Housing Nantucket, 3-bedroom house, beautiful, moved from another neighborhood. They already have it filled with a family, and it's exciting to see everything kind of come alive, working on affordable housing. That's it.
So I attended the Monomoy Homeowners Association meeting, and it was really interesting. They put me in front of all 75 of them, and just got to hear everything. But for being there an hour and a half, their major concern was the intersection of Monomoy and Milestone. And when I explained to them, I should have brought the plans, but that it's the yields and how you can just shoot out of there really quick, all that's going to be changed. It's a state project that'll come up in the fall. It's going to be a T. And at first, it doesn't. That's kind of, if you're coming from Monomoy, it's nice to be able just to shoot out with a yield right onto Milestone Road coming towards the Rotary. But more and more people are trying to cross there. And so having a T when the state changes is going to make it more safe, and with a crosswalk and different signage. And so that was kind of the main thing that I talked about there, just general stuff. Let's see, plastic ban that Christy talked about, I attended. It was really informative hearing what the hospital, what questions they had with vending machines. Do we put glass bottles in vending machines? What do we do with, single-use bottles in those kind of settings? Jay was here from U.S. Foods. He was putting his concerns in. Like, he needs enforcement help Because when he goes in and tries to sell certain compostable things, like sell to his clients here, his restaurants, somebody will say, well, so-and-so is using this, and so-and-so is using this. So it's hard for him to push because he's brought all these products in. So I agree that it was really, really helpful. I would suggest if you haven't been to one, just to go and listen to what everybody's saying. And I'll try to push it as well. The CAC, the Cannabis Advisory Committee, we met, and we made Barry Rector our chair because he showed up late. He was the only one not there. So it's a great example to always be on time. He was stuck in summer traffic, but so he's chair, and Malcolm is vice chair, and we're just kind of everything that we've already that's in our mission, looking at zoning. How do we bring in cultivators? How do we engage the current owners of Green Lady and Act Natural? And so we're going to meet once a month with maybe a couple extra meetings to see if there is anything we're going to put on this year's town meeting, working with Leslie and Andrew and the planning board. And then had a kind of impromptu meeting with Rita and Land Council just to kind of explore what the roadmap would be to make improvements through an environmental lens of pools. What can the Concom do? What can the Select Board do? What can the public do? And it was just a good conversation of, we've been talking about pools for a while, right? We talk about it quite a bit. And just seeing like how can the Select Board get involved with a kind of a yes, but kind of look at it. Like, yes, there's can be some pools being built, but we look at different restrictions. So that's just kind of something we did on the side, kind of impromptu. And
with the ultimate goal being protecting water quality.
Yeah. And I think that's all I have.
Motion to adjourn?
Sorry, second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
God, it's so good.